In this video, we're going to be doing a deep dive into DataPrep 2.0. This is a pretty meaningful update for DataPrep that I really think puts it over the edge and is now an application that you should really consider using for any of your data integration, migration, or general cleanup requirements. Big updates here are really the usage of pipelines, which is where we're going to spend a lot of our time in this video, which is just a really nice graphical interface for identifying a data source, a set of transformations, and then a data destination, just so that you're able to run through a process quickly and easily to manage where your data is going to go. So before I jump in, I do want to ask, if you find the video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. Leave me a comment with any questions, feedback, or additional video requests, and head on over to Zenatta.com and click on Book a Meeting if you'd like to talk about how we can help on your Zoho install. Without any further ado, let us jump right on in. First thing I'm going to do is just give you a high-level understanding of these big kind of sections up at the top and what each of them mean. So workspaces is kind of the top level organization tool for inside of DataPrep. A workspace is really a place that you're going to connect different types of data sources and destinations and set up various pipelines. One of the main use cases for a particular workspace is really the sharing and access, right? So I might want to have a workspace that's just for me, and then I might have another where I add additional team members so they can come in and actually interact with those different pipelines. Now, within a given workspace, I can have one or many different data pipelines. And so if we open up a pipeline just so we can see exactly what that is, this is basically where I'm going to create a data source. In this case, I'm just using some sample data that DataPrep provides. Then I can run it through a set of transformations, right? So this would be like my data cleanup. And then I can determine a destination, where in this case, it's actually just going to prep me a CSV that I can download. So these can have many different steps. They can have branches, and we're going to get into all of those. But essentially, the important thing to know is that the data pipeline is really that flow of data. It's where a lot of the work is going to happen inside of DataPrep. Last but not least, separate from workspaces or pipelines, each time that a given pipeline runs, and this is either when you do it manually or if you have it set up on some kind of schedule, all of those are going to write into this list of jobs. This is where you're going to essentially be able to see what exactly happened, how many rows were used, what type of storage was consumed, and what that output looks like. So if you do have a routine that's generating a CSV, that's going to save here for you to be able to download or view. If you have this running into a third-party application like CRM or an Azure database or AWS, you'll be able to get some insight into the output of this flow just within this jobs list, right? So those are kind of the big three sections. Outside of those, for kind of our product tour here, up in the top right under settings, again, not going to bore you by going through each of these. I do want to highlight just a couple important pages. So one, the way that DataPrep does its billing is actually in the number of rows processed. So in that pipeline I showed, there's 250 or so rows being processed. If I had this running every day, it's going to add each time that it runs to this limit. So you do want to get an idea of how many rows of data you're going to be pushing through here and how often, just to make sure that you're staying underneath your kind of rows limit, or just so that you know that you might need to add additional rows in the future. Outside of that, of course, we can add and control user access. We can tie this into OpenAI if you do want to have some of the kind of AI tools enabled for you inside of DataPrep. We've got compliance and HIPAA, we've got notifications. So if you want to know when things go wrong, when they go right, when you're approaching certain limits in the system, you can do that here. Connections, as you start to add additional applications, which I'll show you how to do in just a moment, those are all going to land here in the Connections tab. Data Bridge is our tool for connecting a local database. So maybe you've got that SQL server running in the basement. You're like, man, I'd really love to start regularly getting some data out of that. Look into Data Bridge. It's a phenomenal tool for accomplishing exactly that. We do also have some privacy control options. And lastly, if you do have any custom data types, you can create and store those here. That's pretty rare, so we're not going to spend too much time on the custom data types for this video. So now let's really get into the meat and potatoes. We're going to jump into a workspace and we're going to create a new pipeline. So let's create new. This is going to drop us into our page here. We're going to call this our YouTube video example pipeline. And really, this just breaks down into a few core steps. So here, first thing we're going to do is click on Add Data. This is where we're going to determine where the data is going to come from. And one of the cool things with DataPrep is that it has a really wide range of sources that we can pull from. That's everything from a file that you would manually upload when you want to run this. You can set up a URL call. So this would be like actually essentially a custom API call to a source of data. Really cool for the perspective of, doing an ongoing integration. You can actually run FTPs through DataPrep. We've done this for a client recently, and it actually does work quite well. You can pull from a different source of cloud data providers. Like, let's say you've got a file that you're regularly updating inside of WorkDrive. That can actually be used as a data source. Of course, you wouldn't pull in like a writer doc like you see in my example here. You might have like a CSV or a Zoho sheet that you're going to be pulling. Same thing applies for Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, all those big sharing tools. We also have a bunch of connectors for cloud storage options, everything from Amazon S3 buckets, Oracle, we've got Azure in here, Amazon RDS and Redshift, really just a ton of those kind of enterprise level data providers. And then last but not least, we have a set of Zoho apps that we can pull in, everything from Zoho Analytics to CRM to Creator, Bigin, Forms. We even have some connectors for our enemy over there, Salesforce. So if you are using that, maybe you're doing a migration, moving from Salesforce into Zoho, you can actually pull that data directly through DataPrep. One thing I will also find, I actually didn't know this until I was preparing to create this video. You can actually set up a little GPT prompt that's going to pull certain sets of data for you. This is actually really cool. So things like average electricity prices by state in the US, right? That might be something that you're going to use to do some targeting in your CRM. So you can actually get really creative with this. And the Zia/GPT tool is essentially going to reach out and create that data set for you. Now, I will always put the asterisks, audit this, make sure that it's correct. This is one of the types of things that a GPT might struggle to do perfectly, right? Which is give you a perfectly accurate set of data to work with. So do be aware that there could be a little bit of drift in these. I would definitely be careful in trusting that explicitly. You're going to want to pull that a few times and just make sure that it's correct. Now, let's say we wanted to pull from CRM, right? We're going to maybe grab data out of here, clean it up, and put it into analytics, or maybe put it back into CRM, kind of create like a loop. When you're pulling from a particular environment, you can choose where you want to pull data from. So do I want to go all the way back to the beginning of time, or do I want to run starting from a custom date? One thing I'll highlight here, in order to make sure that you're not processing rows unnecessarily, just keeping in mind that that is how the tool is going to bill. You might want to run one from the beginning of time, but then set up one from a particular date for an ongoing basis, right? Just to make sure that you're not re-cleaning up the same set of data over and over and over again. Because even if you put a row in and the cleanup actions that you create don't need to touch that record, maybe you're cleaning up phone number and the phone number for that old lead is actually formatted correctly, it's still going to consider that processing a row. So just do be aware that you'll want to be careful with that as you are working in the system. So I'm going to grab a couple modules here. I'm going to grab accounts and contacts. You'll note that you can pull in more than one. I am going to pull more than one here on purpose because you can do some actual comparators and joins of these data sets natively inside of DataPrep. So I'm going to go ahead and click import. This is going to run for just a moment and then we'll be right back with you. All right, so now we've got our two data sets pulling in here. We'll see both of these are sourced from CRM, and then they're creating this little contacts and accounts data set here. Now, what this is and why it kind of gives it this icon is these are basically now the sets of data that we've pulled in that we can do our processing on. Now, there's a couple things that we could do. We could choose to process each of these independently. What we may also do is choose to join them first and then process that new complete set of data. So if we were to go in, let's say we want to do a join, kind of combine these into one data set. If I click on the little plus on the right of either table, it will give me a set of options, right? So I can either prepare the data. This would be like doing that type of cleanup, maybe proper casing some things, or I can actually go ahead and do some joins. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to say, hey, I want to join my contacts and accounts to create one master table, and then I might do some cleanup or analysis on that. So I've got my data sets, I have my contacts, and I can choose what I want to join here. I could join it with itself. That wouldn't make a lot of sense. Or I could join it with its accounts. Now, quick crash course on SQL here. I promise we're not going to do any coding in this video. Join types are going to be a really important part of using DataPrep. So what these join types mean, and they're always going to be visualized with these Venn diagrams, it's basically determining which records do I want to include in the table that results from my join. Now, the most standard join you can do is an inner join. This basically means that a contact or an account are only going to be included in my final data set if they line up with each other. So if I did have a contact that didn't link to an account, it would not be included if I were to do an inner join. Now, let's say I wanted to figure all my contacts and account data where it's available. I might do a left join, which is basically saying, give me all the contacts and the account data where there's a match. Same thing to be said on a right join. This would give me all accounts and the contact data where there's a match. Last but not least would be an outer join, or sometimes called a full join. You'll see that as well. This basically means give me everything, but line it up where you can based on those matching parameters. Now, in this case, I actually know that all of these would give me the exact same output because our join potential is 100. That basically just means that DataPrep has looked at these data sets and it's like, hey, every single one of these has a matching record. So in this case, it wouldn't really matter, but these do matter a lot, especially if you're working with a messier set of data. Let's go ahead and do our join. We're going to call this maybe accounts and contacts, just to give it a nice clean name. Now, here's a really important step. How are we going to do this match? So I made a guess here and it said, hey, we're going to do this match based on currency. Now, in our world, we know that doesn't make a lot of sense because all of these might be in USD. So every account and every contact would match with all of them. This is going to make my data set really, really big and very duplicated and very inaccurate. So what I may want to do is actually go through, look at these pieces of data and determine what is actually going to be an appropriate thing to do my match on. Now, if you've written deluge code before, or if you've looked a lot at the Zoho data, you'll know that this account name field is going to line up to the account IDs for my accounts. Now, if we do a preview here, I do just want to make sure that everything is going to come out right. So what if we want to go in and just take a look at our data before we go forward? So let's take a look here. Great. So we've got this account name field. We can tell this is an account ID, right? Because it's not giving me the name. So now that I've looked at this, I can feel comfortable to go in and actually do that join. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the pipeline, and then we'll actually move forward with that join activity. All right, so now that we've done that quick sanity check, we're going to go ahead and look at our join. We're going to point the account name over to the account ID, and then let's go ahead and do a preview just to see exactly what's going to occur. So what it's doing here, it's basically saying, hey, you've got some fields that are duplicated inside of these two data sets. Now, this is really common with things like owner, right? Where maybe I want to rename this account owner and this contact owner. Same here for like IDs. I like to go in and make sure that these are all unique. Something like currency, same thing. And you might actually decide for some of these, you don't need them in the resultant data set. So like in my case, really everything's in USD. So I might just get rid of these and say, hey, I don't really care about that. It's not necessary for me. And now in this case, I might actually rename this to be account ID, or I could determine, hey, these are actually going to be duplicates, so I don't need this. Account name in that account record is very likely going to be the actual name rather than the ID. Phone and fax and different numbers there. Again, some of this stuff just might not be necessary. So I'm going to remove a bunch of these data pieces as we go through just to clean up our data set a little bit. Now, for you want to make sure that as you're going through and doing these, anything that's actually useful, you don't want to remove, right? But in my case, a lot of this stuff I know just is not going to be relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and get rid of it now, and then we'll be right back. All right, so with that, again, I've just gone through and removed a bunch of these so that we no longer have any conflicts. You want to make sure you go through those in detail and make sure that you're not, again, removing anything that is useful for you or necessary for your reporting. So now what I'm going to do is just take a look at this preview data set and make sure that things look like they're lining up. So if a join is successful, what we're looking for are a few things. One, we want to make sure that nothing's being duplicated. One of the biggest signs that you're joining on a bad ID is when stuff starts to get duplicated. So again, if we had this based on currency, what you would see is like, John Butt here would be in here many times. because every single account and John would match because they all have the same currency. So he would be in here for the number of records where an account exists, right? Because every single one would come back as a match. Another thing that I want to do is make sure I scroll over to find like an account level field. So maybe like that account name, right? It looks like they're actually color coding it for us. That's nice. They actually didn't used to do that. So now we can see, hey, now over here, we have our account level data, and we can see that it's basically one-to-one and everything is lined up. Again, so looking at this, I feel good about our join. Now, no surprise because we're using an ID as a match. So a little pro tip, whenever you're using a tool like DataPrep or Analytics, if you have a record ID in both places, so I have an account ID in my account, just called ID over there, and then I have an account ID in my contact, you want to always use that to do your join. Now you might think, oh, what about account name, right? Or company name, that would also match. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get issues with encoding of some little apostrophe somewhere, and it's a slightly different version of an apostrophe, especially if you're working with data from different sources. There's a lot that can go wrong with doing matches on text fields. So you almost always want to do something like a record ID. If you have to, something like an email, if you're matching contacts between two different systems. But always try to figure out that thing that's going to be very unique and very consistently formatted. Where consistent formatting comes in is something like a phone number, right? You could have a phone number that has dashes, that has parentheses, that has dots, right? And those will not match, right? If we're going through a process like this. So this all looks good to me. I'm going to go ahead and click join, and then it should output us right back out onto that pipeline view so that we can continue our data cleanup on our new single consolidated data table. Beautiful. So look at that. Now we've got this nice little flow chart. I've got contacts and accounts rolling in. I'm running them through a join, and then it's outputting my new contacts and accounts table. Now let's actually get into the prep part of DataPrep. I jokingly have been calling this tool Data Pipe internally because my favorite part of it is the visualization on these pipelines. But now let's say I actually want to prepare some data. So what's an obvious thing we could prepare here as I scroll right here? Phone number, it's a classic. It's going to look a million different ways depending on where you're getting the data from. So let's make sure that all of these are formatted in a nice, consistent way inside of our record. So how are we going to do that? Let's go ahead and take a look at our data type first. So an important thing here is that the type of data that this identifies for a given record is really what's going to determine the types of cleanups that are available. One of the things that I actually recommend with phone number, you might feel like you want to make it into, parentheses, space, number, dash number. You can do that. The nice thing in a lot of Zoho apps is they're actually going to visually display it that way anyways. So what we'll oftentimes recommend our clients is just turn it into a straight number, right? Get rid of all the other junk that's included. I'm going to show you how to do that, but I do first want to highlight just a few options here that are pretty useful. Of course, you can change your data type if there are existing data types available, things like email. You might want to bump it over to that if it didn't automatically identify it. Replace is a really important one. We're going to come back to that in just a moment. Filtering, transforming by example is pretty cool. It's a little hit or miss. This is one that I expect will get better over time. But the idea is you'll be able to type in a format that you want, and then it will actually apply a formula field automatically. Again, your mileage may vary on this. It's one of those ones that does work sometimes, but other times is going to battle you a little bit. So we're not going to use that here for today. Merging, splitting, truncating, adding prefixes, extracting certain components, filling an empty cell. So if you want to replace an empty with a something, you can surely do that. To do our cleanup here, we're actually going to go into replace. We're going to choose our column, which will be phone number. We're going to choose how we want to do a replace. So in our case, we're going to match something in here. Now, in our case, it's pretty simple. We just have this dash, and then we want to replace it with something or nothing. So if I leave replace with empty, it's just going to remove it. If I were to put something in here, right, it would actually drop that directly in wherever one of those dashes are. Now, what you might be thinking is, hey, I actually have multiple different things that could come in. I could have dots, I could have parentheses, I could have all of those. What I'll oftentimes do is actually go in and add multiple different replaces, right? There's no rule to say that I can't also remove, a parentheses, or I can't also remove a dot. So you can kind of stack these rules one on top of each other to make sure that things are being processed how you like it. In our case, just removing the dashes is going to be enough, but just keep in mind that you can run multiple steps on that same column if need be. Another common one here, if we look at something like mailing country, right, we see that a lot of these are United States, where this one is USA. These are the types of things that you can work to clean up in here as well. Oftentimes with this, you might need some type of reference data table. This would be a good use case for that, like ChatGPT integration, right? Give me a table of all countries and their abbreviations, and you could even like do a join against that. Other ones that we may want to consider, you can clean up dates and times, you can clean up names. So maybe you've got first and last name and I want to make full name, right? I can go ahead and run something like a combine or a merge. This is essentially a concatenation. So maybe we want to do like generated full name. Here I might actually want to do first name and then maybe a space and then last name, and that's going to put it together for me. Again, in my case, I think I actually already have that in here, right? Yeah, so I have this from the data set, but you don't always have that, right, with where you're coming from, and you can just run those natively directly inside of your data set. One thing I'll also highlight here is Ask Zia can be a pretty useful thing. So sometimes you might be a little bit stuck, right? You might be going, you know what, like I'm just kind of struggling to get these formatted the way I like it. So maybe I want to do, add a formula column to format mobile number as, and then we can see exactly what this is going to do, right? So I can drop this in, we're going to let it spin for a second, and then we're going to see what happens. This is a bit of a blind test, so we'll see if it does a good job. Ask Zia, it'd be a bit hit or miss. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's a little bit off, but I'm curious to see what it will come up with for us in a case where maybe we do actually want some of that text-based formatting included in a phone number. All right, we stumped it on that one, error while performing. So again, your mileage may vary, but it can be a useful thing to try out, right? I always do suggest giving it a try and seeing if it's going to work for you as part of your flow. Otherwise, again, you'll need to do it the old-fashioned way by using some of those replaces or that pattern matching tool that I showed you under the transform by example. That can also be a pretty useful option. So with some of those cleanups now completed and demoed, let's actually take a look at what is going to happen next. But before we do that, I want to show one little hidden button up here in the top right that is pretty darn useful. So as you're going through and you're creating all of these different rules that are processing the data, they can be a little bit hard to track just by looking at the columns that exist here. So a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll go in, I'll look at this little rule set button and just make sure that I like everything that I've done here. If I need to make any edits to them or change the order in which they occur, I can do all of that from directly inside of this little rule set window. So I always just like to show that. It's a little bit sneaky up here in the top right, but that is essentially what's going to show you each and everything that's happening as we're actually running through this process. Next, let's actually get up into how do we get this into a destination. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually not add a destination. I'm going to add a stage. And now what a stage is here is basically it's going to take this data set that I've just created and it's going to give me a new version of it that I can use. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would I ever just duplicate this and make updates to it here rather than just making any of those updates to the previous step? The reason I might do that is because I could always take this previous output and branch it, right? I could have another line going down where I'm going to finish up more of a process somewhere else, but I want to move it forward and make changes to it before I do a thing on this branch of the pipeline. So what I'm going to do here is I want to use this data to actually get this prepared to make an update back into CRM. So I'm going to do a few things that are going to make that a little bit easier for me. So one of those things is I want to make sure that this column is just called ID. This makes sure that when I actually go to match against CRM data, I have a nice clean data set to accomplish that. Another thing that I might want to do is remove some columns that aren't going to be necessary to run my import. So if this branch of my flow is essentially just designed to update that phone number, and then again, imagine my other branch is going to continue and maybe push this out to some other data set or, make some updates to the account based on that contact data. I might want to carry that forward in that branch. But I could very easily look at this data and see, hey, I've got a lot of stuff in here that's not needed at all for making an update to my phone number. So if I want to get rid of any of those fields, let's say like vendor name, I want to get rid of, I can come in, I can click right click, and I can just delete it, right? And I can apply that here. I can also choose more options. So maybe for all this like account level data, right? Maybe I don't need any of this to make the update to my contact, right? So I can just go through, select any of these that are not going to be necessary for me and get them deleted. So I'm going to run through and make a whole bunch of selections right now, and then we'll be right back to see the output after all of these deletes have been processed. All right, so with that, I've removed a whole bunch of data. Again, we can see all of that here in my data set, or in my rule set, pardon me. One thing I do recommend is as you are building these out, less is more. So if I am going to write an update into the CRM that's going to update phone number for a given record, I want to have the least amount of columns here possible, and I'll show you why when we get to that step right now. So I now have this prepped. I've got all those deletes run in. It's got that cleaned up phone number, right, that we removed all the formatting from. And so here, I'm going to go ahead and now add a destination. I'm going to set up CRM as my destination. Here we can choose which module we want to write to. So again, we're making this a bit of a loop where it's going to come back and update those existing contacts. I'm going to update only existing records, and then I can make that choice based on ID or email. Now, like I mentioned earlier, whenever we have ID available, we always want to use it. You might wonder, hey, why did you bother renaming ID, right? It was called Contact ID. That was because when I joined it, I needed to have it not called ID because account and contact share that name. But now that I want to actually push it back, I'm going to rename it back to ID. As you use DataPrep more and more, you're going to find opportunities to be really efficient with rows, right? So I'm going through here. This is kind of our beginner's tutorial on the application as a whole. I might do some advanced ones in the future about kind of really maximizing, or I should say minimizing, the amount of rows that you're going to use. But so here, now I'm mapping on ID. It's my favorite parameter to use. We're going to not empty a field if something is in there, and then I'll go ahead and click Save. So now we have this output. Again, keep in mind the reason that I did this stage and prepped things here, and maybe I'll actually rename this, call this our contact import data. The reason I did this, again, is just because I could always carry this data forward in a different pathway separate from this import to contacts, right? So you're going to want to plan a lot of these things out. I actually do find it useful to like lucid chart or whiteboard this before I get started, just to make sure that I've kind of designed that path appropriately. But again, we can always do these branches and make things work in different ways for different parts of my overall pipeline. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about running this. So we can always schedule a run. This would be like, hey, we're going to schedule this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. You can trigger this using a Zoho flow, which is really cool. So like maybe something gets completed in a different app, this runs, and then the flow continues. Or you can actually set up a custom webhook where you can just post data directly to a place, and it will trigger the run of this particular routine. What we're going to do here is we're actually just going to run this right now so that we can see exactly what happens. I'm going to go ahead and click refresh data from source for this. It's going to ask me to do a little bit of configuration. So, where do we want to import from? I'm going to say we're going to import all data for both of these. And we're going to start this, let's just say all the way back, the beginning of time, May 2021. Again, you want to be intentional about these just to make sure that you're not going to pull too much data. Now here, I'm going to click run, and we'll see this go through each of my steps, right? So pulling the contacts, prepping them as a stage, running the join, doing our transformations, removing a bunch of fields, and then finally, and last but not least, actually running that import into CRM. So what I'm going to do in the meantime while that's running is we're going to go ahead and pull up a contact so we can see a bit of a before and after. So if we look at our contact here, John, we can see right now, as of now, he has that phone number with the dashes in it. As this runs and completes, we should be able to see that that number updates to the appropriate value once this flow has completed. So I'll be right back with you once that is all done. All right, so what we can see here is that unfortunately, our target match has failed. This is something that can commonly happen. Good news is it's easy to fix. So let's go ahead and click Edit Pipeline, and then we're going to jump into our contact import data. Gets a little tricky because you might think, hey, I'm going to go over to my destination. That might be where I fix this. No, not quite. There's actually a little secret button that I want to show you. So if we go into our data preparation, you might notice there's a new little button up here because this step points to a destination. So if I come in and I look at target matching and I click on show target, what this will see is that, hey, there are things in here that might be required or unnecessary, or maybe there's a mandatory in the column. So here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at this. Our last name appears to be missing. So how do we go ahead and fix that? Well, if I go into my rule set and I go into my delete, I can make an edit to this, right? So if I click on edit, might take a sec to load just because I have so many in here. We're going to find last name. We're going to add that back in, and then we'll click apply. So now we should see one more column that's popped in for last name. Basically, I think what's happening here is it's just seeing that a mandatory field is not included. It can be a little bit dangerous to run that import. Other than that, the rest of these are just saying, hey, this isn't mandatory, so you could match it, but technically you don't have to. I'm going to go ahead and click on refresh our target just to see if anything else pops up that we might want to be aware of. We're just going to scroll to the right and look for any red. All looks good there. These are basically just saying, hey, these aren't matched, but it should be fine. All right, so everything now looks good. Let's go back to our pipeline, and then we're going to do a quick rerun of this and see if our data will match a little bit better this time around. Because I'm not resyncing the data, this will run a little quicker. And hopefully what we'll see is that this completes successfully. It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? When everything has green check marks. So this time, again, because we properly set up that target matching, everything is looking good. One thing, again, just to keep in mind, all these records already have a last name, but it really does want it mapped when you're going to run these types of updates. So I'll leave it to the viewer to determine, did I make that error on purpose to show you target matching? Or did I just forget to do that when I was running through? The world may never know. Now I could go back to my record and I'll give him a refresh. And what we should now see is that our phone number field has been formatted. Like I mentioned earlier, Zoho will apply this little parentheses and dash. But if we click in, we can see that it's actually just the numbers exactly how we like it. So just like that, we've actually run through, set up our job, and we're able to run this sync. This is one of the most interesting ways, I think, to use DataPrep is for this idea of, hey, I'm going to take data out of my CRM. I'm going to do some cleanups, some joins. Maybe I'm going to bring in third-party data, and then I'm going to put it right back in. This alleviates some of the requirement to do this with custom scripting or writing a code that's going to interact with third-party APIs, prevents you from having to pull things into analytics and run SQL. So really across the board, it can be a very, very useful tool. Last but not least, back on the homepage, you can always see everything that's going on. So we can see, hey, as I was running through this, doing some testing, a few different things failed, this one succeeded. You've got click through to see more detail on all of these, and you can always run it directly from here. I will also show they've got these little templates. These are kind of nice as well. So if you do want to look at like a template for migration or cleanup, you can always pull those in and use them as a starting point. You can also create your own templates if those are valuable for you. I think we've wrapped up here for today on DataPrep. If you found the video useful, please be sure to like and subscribe down below. Leave me a comment with any questions or video requests or any ways that you're using DataPrep. I always love to hear about those. And as always, my name is Tyler Colt, and I will see you next time.